You're listening to Seminary Dropout, and I'm your host, Shane Blackshear. In cooperation with MissioAlliance.org, straight from my house in Austin, Texas to yours, interviews with leading Christian authors, leaders, and thinkers, because good theology should be for everyone. This is Seminary Dropout. Let's go! My guest today is Osheta Moore. She's a city dweller, she's a wife, mom, friend, speaker, event planner, and shameless reality TV watcher. Her blog is called Shalom in the City. Osheta, thanks for being on Seminary Dropout.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
You grew up in the suburbs of Houston, is that right?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town, about 45,000 people, so it's a suburb, called Texas City, Texas. And it's about 45 minutes outside of Houston, so I would say it's probably more of a suburb of maybe Galveston. But it's just this little town that's completely surrounded by refineries, but lots of pretty affluent community because of all those, refinery that refined oil money. So yeah.
That's sweet oil money.
Yep, exactly.
I'm from West Texas, so I get that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, so you get it. And then the stinky smell in the air, all the
yeah.
Totally worth it.
That's right. Were you born there?
No. So I was born actually here in Southern California. So now we live in Los Angeles, which I'm sure you'll get to. But I was born on a military base in Oceanside because my dad was a Marine for 20 years. And then when I was born, he was stationed in Galveston when they had a base out there. And then he decided to retire and go to college. And so I don't remember very much of California, but I spent most of my life in Southeast Texas.
When did you leave Texas City?
Okay, so I went to my first year of college. I went to a small Bible college in Springfield, Missouri. I was Assembly of God. I became a Christian in an Assembly of God church. And so I really wanted to go to a Christian college, primarily because my family is a very culturally Christian family. And so I didn't get a ton of spiritual formation help at home. And I wanted to go away to a Christian school my first year just to sort of examine my faith in a deeper context and really figure out if I wanted to be a Christian because I wanted to be a Christian, or was it sort of like my teenage rebellion because my parents really weren't Christians, or what? So the first, I left Texas City when I was 18. I went to Springfield, Missouri. And then after that, I transferred back to Texas to finish up at a state school.
You said your parents were, your family were cultural Christians. Did you have like a meaningful experience away from home?
Yeah. So my mom worked in a retail store. She worked in Walmart for a long time. And one of her coworkers used to attend this Baptist church. And my mom was raised Baptist. And so she was feeling a little bit, I guess, I don't know, guilty, or she wanted to make sure that her kids had some exposure to Christianity. And so her friend told her about the Vacation Bible School that their church does every summer. And my mom was a full-time working mom, and the Vacation Bible School was literally like 8:30 to 5:30. It was a full day, and it was something like 2 or 3 weeks. So this was back when it was totally okay to serve Kool-Aid and cookies every single day at Vacation Bible School, because I don't know how they afforded to do it for 3 weeks. But I was around 5 at that point, and that was the entry age that you could go. And so she would send my baby sister to daycare, and she would send me to Vacation Bible School. And at that point, I'd never seen people so happy. I remember being just amazed at how happy everyone was and how welcoming they were. My background is really tumultuous. My family environment is a little bit dysfunctional. And so I didn't see a lot of joy at home, but I saw lots of it with these people at this Vacation Bible School. And I knew it was more than the Kool-Aid. I knew there was something else there. And when they introduced me to Jesus, I just felt like I wanted to know more. And so as a as a 5-year-old, I was a pretty bossy kid, I guess. I told my mom that I needed to go back every Sunday. And I think I even remember she remembers me saying something like, if I don't go back, I'm going to get in trouble. And she's like, no, Sheeta, you're not going to get in trouble. Um, but so she arranged it that the church van would come pick me up every Sunday. And so at 5 until I would say I formally became a Christian and got baptized around 7 or 8, I would just go every Sunday and the church van would bring me. And so that's how I came to faith. And so for me, um, it was very much like a thing that is very tied to my childhood. Like I hear a lot of Christians say, I've been a Christian for all my life, as long as I can remember. And that's true for me, but not necessarily because I come from a Christian home, but because it was a choice I made as a little girl.
How did your parents feel about you like wanting to go to church every Sunday and like wanting to, kind of do that for real?
Um, I think at first they thought it was very cute. And I think they were happy that I was feeling independent enough to make some of my own choices. But I think the older I got, it became a point of conflict for us because um, I was a very quote like on fire Christian, and I was not afraid to like be vocal and carry my backpack to school and like all of the cliches. I was about it. Would ask what would Jesus do, and Jesus was still all right with me, and love is a verb, like all of that. Uh, and so I think the older I got, the more zealous and I became, and that became a point of conflict for us because I was very judgmental. The church that I ended up going to was great for spiritual formation, but it wasn't really great in learning to love people well and love them into the kingdom. And so I just remember having lots and lots of arguments with my parents around the choices they were making or things that they were saying or their attitude towards me. And my dad's favorite word for me was, "Oh, you're being so sanctimonious, Osheta." And he would often prevent me from going to youth group if I got too self-righteous. So I had to learn at home how to um, live the gospel and live the love of Jesus and not be so not Bible beating with them over their head. And so that's kind of how my parents responded to um, my choice to be a Christian. My dad went to a Bible college before he went into the military. And so he has his own kind of tumultuous walk with Jesus that he processes things with. And so does my mom. And so as an adult, I can look back and see how some of the ways that I approach them with my faith and my journey stepped on their toes and wasn't helpful in really showing them who Jesus is.
I think it's got to be so hard for teenagers who really want to be Christians, and especially whose parents aren't on the same level necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, we know Christian adults who are not gracious, who are not loving.
Yeah.
But to be a teenager who's just kind of figuring it out and dealing with normal teenage stuff and, hormones coursing through your body,
Yeah.
I think that's got to be so difficult.
It was. And I remember being so confused because I loved my parents so much, and it was coming out of a place of deep fear from them. This was when I had a theology, it was a very fear-based theology that I didn't want the people I loved to die and go to hell. And I just was so scared that God would send my parents to hell. And so I think fear is like that scripture where perfect love casts out fear. Like I don't think love and fear can live in the same space. And I was just so afraid for them. Like I would come home from Heaven's Gates Hellfire, that those haunted houses or those plays where like you see a group of teenagers die in a car accident and they go to hell
Oh,
and
yeah,
all
we've
that.
all been there. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would come home from that and be so scared for them, and that's usually where those hard, difficult, really loud conversations came out of that fear for them.
So you thought your parents were going to hell?
Um, yeah. Well, I thought God would send them to hell. Yeah. And so for me, it was a it's that teenage trying to figure yourself out, and I'm also trying to figure God out. Like, God, how can you be loving
Hmm.
and you love me and you know that I all that I do, and then you see my parents and they do things too, and I want them to go to heaven and just because I said the right words and I'm doing the right thing. So I was like processing all of that, and I could totally see how all of that angst just came out of my parents. And it's not like because I have a 13-year-old. So when he brings his crazy to me around like video games, I'm like, that's teenage crazy. I can just ignore that. I'm not jumping on that. But I could see how for my parents can be just compounded because it's not just teenage crazy. It's their teenager is having like a faith crisis, or their teenager is is around teenager just parenting a teenager. But then there's that religion faith component, which always makes every conversation a little bit testy. So yeah.
Looking back, do you feel like at 5 years old was when you really came to know Jesus, or was it a gradual process after that?
I think at 5 years old, no, I think it was a gradual process because I do remember um, sort of, I don't know if you would call it recommitment. I got saved every summer at youth camp, basically from like 12 to 15. So I don't know if there was like a moment where my faith became my own, but I think it did evolve. And as I grew up, um, my faith grew with that. So I would say, yeah, I would say yes, I became a Christian at 5, only because I knew what I was getting into was different than what I had. And I think that's a key component for anybody's conversion story is moving from the way that they've always done things to like this new way, this like way that's focused around Jesus. Which for me as a 5-year-old, that's all I wanted was to live in that song, Jesus loves me, this I know. So yeah.
Is that hard to like explain to people? Because when you talk about, a change in your life, and when you're as young as 5 years old, it's kind of like, how bad could you have been before that? You know what I mean? Because
Well,
I feel
yeah.
that I feel like when I really had, like a real experience with Jesus, I was around 12, and
Hmm.
that's a lot older than 5, but still it's
Yeah.
like how bad could you have been at younger than 12 years old? But I legitimately feel, um, like, yeah, I mean, yeah, I wasn't robbing banks, but I just feel like I was a selfish person before that and just kind
Yeah.
of trying to get by, really.
Well, I think my background, my story is pretty difficult because um my family was I've said dysfunctional, but it was pretty bad. My dad is still married to his first wife, but he is living with my mom. And so until I was 14, it was my mom and my dad and his wife all in one house. And so my older brother was there and he was going through all of like the emotional um all of the things that a teenager, because he's 12 years older than me, would feel when you're trying to figure out when you're trying to process your dad is no longer in love with your mom, but he's in love with this other woman, but they're all living together. Like it was a really like funky background. And so my older brother was emotionally and verbally abusive to me um, when I was really, really little. From like until like I guess I've always remembered him being verbally abusive towards me. And so I knew at 5 going into when I started going to that vacation Bible school, I think I was just so desperate to hear that I wasn't a mistake, and that I'm not dirty or bad, or that I'm deeply loved, even though I am the product of an adulterous relationship. So to answer your question, when I look back at my life, like if I look back at my kids and they're 5, I'd be like, oh my gosh, guys, you don't even have a conversion story at 5. but but for me, because of my background and because that's part of my story, um, I yeah, I would feel like yeah, the love of God is what drew me in, and it's kind of like that passage, his kindness leads us to repentance. I just experienced this overwhelming kindness from the people of God that made me wonder, who is this God that has that kind of kindness and abundance, and how can I be connected to him?
That makes so much sense to me, and it's so beautiful because I think when we put the onus on understanding something or like on a cognitive level to being a requirement to knowing Christ, then I think that's really problematic. What do you do? One, with young children who can't understand much, and what do you do with people who are intellectually disadvantaged who may never understand certain things?
Right.
But we can all have an experience. We can all have an encounter with Jesus.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point.
Um, so you live with your mom, your dad, and your dad's first wife.
Yeah.
Let's go back to that.
Okay.
What
Yeah.
was that
Okay.
like? First of all, I guess how did that arrangement come to be? Was that for the sake of you as the children that they thought mom and dad should live together, or was it just a
Yeah.
practical thing?
I think it was a combination of practicality and I think it started out as my dad wanted to stay connected to both families, and he didn't quite know how, and he knew that his first relationship was over, and his first wife, or his wife rather, is a sweet woman. She was always like a second mom to me, so I would never say anything bad about her. Um, but they knew that their relationship was over, but she was raised very Catholic, and so she didn't believe in divorce. And so I felt like, as an adult now, I understand. My dad felt trapped and he didn't know what to do. There weren't books on how to, there weren't books about how to like move from one relationship to another. Divorce wasn't a big thing in the 80s. There weren't resources for that. So I think my dad kind of just did the best he could with what he had in front of him. Um, and so we all just lived together. And it wasn't, when I've told this story in other contexts, it wasn't like Big Love by any stretch of the imagination. There wasn't like my mom and my dad's wife were not sister wives kissing each other at on their way out the door to work or anything like that. But the practical logistics of running a home, they divided between the three adults. The finances they divided between three incomes. But I think that that dynamic is unhealthy for a ton of reasons, but it was really confusing for us kids. So I'm the oldest of four from my mom and dad's relationship, and we never quite knew where we fit in the whole scheme, like the whole family. And when my dad's wife and my mom would argue, because how can you not argue with each other when you're trying to figure out where do you fit in this man's life that you both, one loves now and the other used to love. When they would argue, we wouldn't know who we should be rooting for because we loved both women. And so yeah, that it just, I feel like it came out of just a deep like confusion and not knowing what to do, and then you kind of make a decision and you don't know how to get out of it. And so we lived like that until I was 14, when my older brother, who was an adult at that point, basically begged his mom to at least leave the living arrangement for her own mental health. And when she left, things felt normal, um, but we never, they never got a divorce. My parents never got married. That's something. During my first year of college, I went through a deep depression and I was in counseling for a while. And that was one of the things that I really had to process through is um, how my parents never created a normal life when they could. And what does it mean to be somebody that's just stuck and doesn't know how to get out of something that's dysfunctional? And it just gave me such grace for people who don't know that they have other choices or can't even see another choice for themselves.
Do you feel like they had a pretty after your dad's first wife or wife moved out? Do you feel like your parents had a pretty normal marriage relationship, short of the documentation?
No. And I don't feel obviously I'm sharing this on the podcast, so I don't feel like it's a surprise. I feel like my parents and I have as an adult now, it's funny when you become an adult, the access to new kind of conversations that you have is crazy with your parents. But I've had conversations with um, my mom about their relationship, and we never specifically acknowledged that um, things should have been different or quote unquote normal when my dad's wife moved out. But we do acknowledge that there's sort of this specter of what could have been hovering over them. That they're both in their 60s. My dad's in his 70s, my mom's in her 60s. They just don't think like, well, we've always done this. They've been together for 40 years. They were together for 10 years before my mom got pregnant with me. And that's basically how my dad's infidelity was found out because my mom refused to get an abortion. Um, so I think that there's just, I don't think they will quote ever be normal. And that's something for me that I had to sort out and redefine what normal is and be okay with that in terms of, like my dream for what my family should have been like or what I would have liked it to be.
Do you think that really affected the way that you thought and think of marriage?
Yes, because my husband and I, from the beginning, he never had an example of what a healthy marriage looks like. I thankfully did have a good example. This church that I ended up settling in at around 12, um, the Assembly of God Church, there's a couple who basically adopted me. There's this whole beautiful church ceremony when I was around 16 where they formally like adopted me in front of the church community as their spiritual daughter. Um, I spent so much time at their house. And so in terms of like my spiritual formation, in terms of like just formation into like a functioning adult, they were pivotal. And so they showed me what a healthy marriage could look like. And so when my husband and I started dating, those were the kind of conversations that we had all the time. Like, what did we want that was different from our family of origin? What were the things that we loved about married couples? We were really really big into seeking out mentoring couples because we met and got married in New Orleans. But this couple that I love lived back in Texas City, and so as a dating couple, we started identifying who were the couples that we wanted to emulate and inviting them into our lives. And then even when we got married, inviting them to be mediators in early conflict so we could learn how to fight fair. And so I think that, yeah, my parents' relationship really showed me what I didn't want in terms of just being on the same page. Obviously, being on the same page, like getting the documentation, but being on the same page on so many important things. But my parents did have they do have a really loving relationship. My dad, there isn't anything my dad wouldn't do for my mom, and and I really loved the way my dad spoke of my mother. He was such a progressive thinker in terms of women's ability and their role in the home, and um, he would always celebrate my mom's um, successes at work and push her to strive even further and give her so much grace if she had to work extra time and so that for me was formative and important. And that was something that when my husband and I started talking about like roles in our marriage and complementarian, egalitarian, all those kind of things, that's what I looked back on in terms of like what I wanted was the way that my dad treated my mom. So I think it's good and bad. And I think that's just the case with any like married couple. They got good things and they got bad things from their parents and watching their parents' marriage.
How did you get to New Orleans?
So, um, like I said, I transferred out of that Christian Bible college in Springfield to go to a state school. Uh, and part of it was money. Part of it was I was beginning to get a little disillusioned with Christianity and Christians were starting to annoy me. And I needed to step away and figure out again, did I want to be a Christian because I wanted to be a Christian, or was I a Christian because I was in this bubble? And so I chose to go to a state school. Um, and but I would always go to church every Sunday. I was a part of on-campus Christian groups and things like that. So I wasn't stepping away from my faith completely. I just wanted to explore it in a more, I guess, independent, autonomous way. And so the college and career group, which I guess now you would call it a young adult ministry, we called it college and career, but the young adult ministry leader came to us and asked us if anyone would be interested in giving up their spring break to go to do urban missions in New Orleans during Mardi Gras. And the only context of Mardi Gras that I ever had was Galveston, because Galveston sometimes does a huge Mardi Gras thing. And I remember sneaking out with a bunch of my girlfriends to go to Mardi Gras and getting beer spilt all over me and just hating every single thing about that whole experience. That I thought Mardi Gras is the worst thing ever. The worst gathering of people on the face of the earth. I will never do any kind of Mardi Gras in Galveston. And so when my young adult pastor said, would anybody want to go to Mardi Gras in New Orleans? Um, I should have had a visceral no reaction, but there is something, I guess you can call it God, the Holy Spirit, made me really want to be a part of that. Um, and so And even to this day, I don't remember how I raised the money. I don't even remember filling out the form to go. Like, there's so many things I remember in my life. I don't remember. I remember saying yes in my mind and then being on the bus to go. So it was really just something that God sort of, I guess, carried me through. Um, but I went to New Orleans. It was February 14th of 2000. I remember because I was really upset that I was single going to Mardi Gras, and I remember like complaining in the van with some of the girls, like, "Is God really going to give us our one?" And then our and the young adult pastor's wife, I remember her turning around and being like, "Guys, we're on our way to a mission trip. We should be focused on Jesus right now."
Of
I remember,
course.
so it just felt like, oh yeah, we were complaining about being single on Valentine's Day on our way to go do inner city ministry. And that trip was um, a game changer for me in terms of my life's goals. My dad and I had a very close relationship um, because we had similar goals. Was a he's a psychotherapist, and um, he he has 2 degrees. He went as far as he could with his education, and so he sat me down and we sort of talked through my future goals and what career I wanted to go into. And as an African American woman, there's a talk that a lot of our dads give us, and we've seen it in Scandal. So is that you have to be twice as good to get half of what they have, kind of conversation. And so the conversation my dad and I always had was, whatever field I went into, I needed to get the highest degree possible, and I needed to go to the best schools as possible so that I can be able to have a comfortable life. But when I went away to so the trajectory that I was on was I was going to go to law school. I was going to become a lawyer, and so that was what I wanted to do. Um, so and then even in my mind when I went to that trip, I was still trying to. I was in that weird, that when you're in college, you're kind of still figuring out your major. So I was like doing the like I'm an English major for now until I like really know what I want to
So
do.
I figure
Because
out, yeah.
Right, because I knew that I was supposed to be on this like lawyer track, and I did that thing where you tell your parents you're studying one thing when you're actually like doing interpretive dance during. And so to my parents, I was on this like really professional track, but actually on paper, I was double majoring dance and education because I figured if I'm paying for school, which I was, then I wanted to do whatever, but I wasn't going to tell my dad because I did not want the maelstrom of dad drama to fall down the. So when I went to New Orleans, I was still kind of just reconciling what it is that I love to do, what it is that I want to do. I really loved being creative. I really loved writing. I really wanted to teach. Um, I really loved dance. Um, but also what I knew was expected of me. So when I got to New Orleans, and I saw the extreme poverty in the city, and not just poverty of resources, but just poverty of like emotional poverty and the desperation um, of I something in me changed. I don't know if I got bolder, but I just realized that there was more to my life than getting the best degree and having the best job and even like avoiding conflict for my own comfort. And so when I was in New Orleans, um, that's when I decided to come back to school and tell my dad that I was actually a dance and education major or dance and English major, and that I was going to teach that I wanted to come to teach when I graduated from college in a low performing school in New Orleans, and then teach dance at a community center, like in the evenings or in the weekends. And that was kind of where the my dad and I had a fork in the road in our relationship, if you would say, and we've never 100% recovered from that. But that's how I ended up in New Orleans. I went back to school and then went to school and then ended up moving to New Orleans to be with my husband, who I met on that missions trip.
What was he there for? Was he living
So,
there?
no, so the school was a practical, hands on Bible college called New Orleans School of Urban Missions. And so, what they would do is they would host these groups to come in to help do the work that they're doing, raise money because you would, obviously pay to come and stay in the dorms. So it's something like a fundraiser. Um, and then they would host it, but they would also have their campus days, for lack of a better word, like for prospective students come. And so my husband was there to look at the school to determine whether or not he wanted to be a student, and I was there to do the missions work. And so that's how we met.
Look, going back to that conversation that you had with your dad, do you get on some level what he was so upset about?
Oh yeah. And as a mom now, to brown kids, I get that. Again, the the deep fear and making choices out of that fear. I'm fearful for my kids for other reasons, not necessarily around like financial stability. Um, but I could see how he was afraid that I would I wouldn't have the resources, education wise, or just practical resources to to survive. And I think there's also a part of it. I think, you're a parent, I'm a parent. There's a part of us that wants our kids to do better. And, he's a psychotherapist, but the idea of having a doctor or a lawyer is like better than what he did. And so I think that there is an element of that, just wanting us to have a better life than he had. Um, and so I get it. I get it on a like a um, as a black family, I get that part of it, and I also get, just as a parent, that deep desire for better. But I think that what I don't get, and I don't, well, I do get this. I think if my dad was um, a disciple of Jesus, if he was following Jesus, and taking his cues from him for the choices in his life, I think that my dad would then get what it is that I wanted to do, and he would ultimately trust God for my provision. And so I think that was where we rubbed a lot, was um, when I chose to study what I wanted to, and then I brought this white boy home. My dad was like, "What are you doing?" And then this white boy is not going to be a doctor or anything like that. He's going to be a pastor in the inner city. I can see how there was just a ton of fear for my dad, that I wish he didn't have.
Was your life growing up, was it diverse or was it pretty segregated?
Um, it's pretty segregated. I would say that Texas City is a pretty diverse city in that there's there's a clearly affluency, because is that even a word? I guess so.
Affluency? I totally
Yeah.
bought it. If it's not,
Okay.
I don't know.
Because they're surrounded by so many resources, so much money. Our schools are great. our football team has an amazing field to play on. That matters. Friday night football matters. Um, so there's a lot of representation of affluence in Texas City. We have a outlet mall, all of that. But then there's obviously the quote unquote wrong side of the tracks. There's lower income neighborhoods. Um, but there wasn't anything in terms of, there weren't, I never saw a homeless person until I got to New Orleans. So in terms of like that kind of diversity, there was some, but then in terms of like actually like racial diversity or even religious diversity, not so much, where you're pretty standard Texan town. Um, and and so for me, I had to learn to be very comfortable moving in social situations where I'm one of or the only Black person in the room. I became really comfortable with being someone's Black friend. You know how like some white people say, "I'm not racist, I have a Black friend." That's
Right.
me. I'm the Black friend. um and so for that reason, I didn't quite understand some of my dad's fears around racism because white people were so nice to me, or fears around scarcity around for me as a Black person, because I was just, I knew a lot of white people. Nobody was you know overtly racist to me. I just, but I was stuck in a systemically, I guess not racist, not a racist system, but I was kind of like, there wasn't a whole lot of diversity, and so I didn't really learn to be comfortable as a Black person. And I almost kind of resented being a Black person because of the lack of diversity. I used to get teased a lot for the way that I speak because I quote unquote sounded white, or I used to be teased because my I didn't have very many Black friends, and the few Black people who were at my school kind of were into things that I wasn't allowed to be in. And so like these are very like surface kind of things, but I wasn't allowed to watch BET. So when somebody would talk about something on BET or some artist, I wouldn't even know who they were. Now I was allowed to listen to Boys to Men because they use harmony and that's intelligent. But I wasn't, but like if you asked me who Tupac was, I had no idea, none whatsoever. Um, and I think there's a part of my parents' resentment that all of our stories as African Americans is so tied to racism and the civil rights movement that we didn't even really talk about that, because my parents really wanted us to not get stuck in our past baggage, but to move forward. But I think what they didn't understand and what I'm learning now is if you don't understand the past, you really can't move forward.
Did they not let you watch BET because they just felt like it was too adult, or was it like they didn't want you to be exposed to that culture?
It was a culture thing. Yeah, for sure. It was the stereotypes and the culture, and um my dad would say like pull your pants up and all those things, and he was very very much like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Anybody can do anything in this country. That was his his philosophy. And so he just felt like those kinds, like that kind of TV programming, that culture wasn't helpful, and again like moving forward.
When did you decide to move to New Orleans?
When my husband and I were getting very serious, that's when I decided to move to New Orleans. So it was around 2001, 2000, maybe close to 2002. I moved to New Orleans, and we were together in New Orleans for a year and a half, and then we got married in New Orleans during Mardi Gras.
During Mardi Gras.
During Mardi Gras.
You guys moved away because of Hurricane Katrina, is that right?
Yeah, so we were there, and when we got married, I was renting an apartment on Barone Street, which is right off of St. Charles. But the community center that we were both working at was in Holly Grove. And so we really were buying into, and we still are, we're really huge supporters of CCDA, Christian Community Development Association. And one of their guiding principles is incarnational living. So if you want to affect the most change in a under-resourced community, you should consider moving in. And so we decided that we wanted to move into Holly Grove. And so right after we got married, like literally, we went on our honeymoon, came back, started packing up my place, and um, we were a part of renovating one of their older buildings into apartments for people who wanted to move in and live in the community. So we were one of the first tenants of that building, and so we were pretty settled there. I mean, my husband did like DIY, like he was really working in that apartment. And I figured, you know, we were both so committed to living in Holly Grove. We were there through shootings and the really like hard times in that community. We were there working in the schools. I was teaching dance at the community center. So we were so invested in Holly Grove. We had our son, and we were even having conversations like, do I want to homeschool because the schools were so bad? Do I want to put the kids into the schools and be in effect change from within? Like we were having like long term, we are ride or die for New Orleans forever and ever. And then I was pregnant with our middle son, TJ. I was 8 months pregnant, and we heard about Katrina, and we almost didn't evacuate because the year before Ivan came through, and we evacuated to my parents' house because Texas City is only like a 5 hour, 6 hour drive from New Orleans. And it ended up taking us something like, 10 hours to get to my parents' house. And we just wasted so much gas, so much resources. And when you are working in the inner city, he was working for AmeriCorps and then building websites on the side to make ends meet. And I was teaching preschool, and we couldn't afford to just evacuate. So when Mayor Nagin called the mandatory evacuation, we seriously considered just sticking around. But my husband knew I was 8 months pregnant, and I am seriously not a nice person when I'm hot. And he said that we would probably lose electricity, which meant we'd lose air conditioning in August in New Orleans. So that probably wasn't a
No,
smart
no.
thing.
Yeah.
And so we didn't even pay our rent. We used our rent to evacuate. That's how paycheck to paycheck we were living. And so we evacuated to my parents' house. And when I say my parents' house, I mean my godparents. My parents didn't have space for us to stay there, so we stayed with my godparents for
The ones that kind of spiritually adopted you at
Yep.
16?
Yeah.
Okay.
hmm We stayed with them, and then when we realized the city was devastated and we didn't have any place to go, I basically told my husband, I don't care where we have this baby, I just need an epidural. So we decided to try to find a new place to live. We knew that staying in Texas City really wasn't an option because of how um, unhealthy my family was, and my spiritual parents didn't have space for long term to host a family long term. And I think my husband, I think he had a sense that things were shifting for us in terms of like the next steps of us as a family. Because
You kind of
he
felt
was
like maybe that chapter was over.
yeah, like he just knew like that New Orleans chapter was over, and so he was really excited and ready to move into like the next chapter. And he had told me a few years before that he felt like God was asking him to go to seminary, but there were only two seminaries that were progressive enough for his theological framework to fit into. And it was Fuller out here in Pasadena, California, or Gordon Conwell in Boston, Massachusetts. Gordon Conwell has another campus, I think it's in North Carolina, um, but the Boston campus the Boston site had an inner city campus that my husband was really interested in. And so when we were trying to figure out what to do after Katrina, my husband called up one of his friends who he went to Bible college with, who happened to live in Massachusetts. And they had a long conversation. And my husband came back and asked me if I thought what I thought of moving to Boston. And so again, I was pretty ready to move wherever there was like good health care and an epidural. So we got in our car and we moved to Boston. And then he ate the elephant one bite at a time in terms of his degree. He has a master's in urban missions because we had our baby as soon as we got to Boston. So we did this like 2 week road trip, and I was really, as they say in New Orleans, big pregnant. Um, and we got to Boston and had our baby. I had postpartum depression after our second one, but we thought it was just like depression from losing everything in a major um
Yeah.
in a hurricane, in a major,
Which would be legitimate. Yeah.
yeah, totally legitimate. So I thought it was just that. And then shortly after we had our daughter, our kids are 11 months apart, our last two. So we found out we were pregnant with Trinity when TJ was like 9 weeks old or 8 or 10 weeks old.
Oh my gosh.
I know, right? And so we and so then he just had to take his time, and so we were in Boston for 9 years while he went to school and we planted a church there and all of that.
Something that you talk about in your blog and here and there is about just how you're influenced by Anabaptist theology.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that. How did you first encounter it, and what was it that drew you to it?
Uh, I think I've always been intrigued by the peace teachings of Jesus because I am the daughter of an ex-Marine who did 2 tours in Vietnam, and the conversations that my dad and I would have around his time in the service and his time at war um, were not scary, but very sad and striking conversations. I just remember always being so convinced that um, war was dangerous for the human mind. Um, and so I always looked in the Bible for Jesus's response to violence in war because I wanted to know how Jesus could help my dad. Um, and so I so that's always been just a running interest of mine as a Christian. But working in the inner city and um, seeing gun violence and seeing the effects of that made me really explore what does my faith have to say for a family that is suffering from violence, and what does my faith have to say that would challenge those who are living violent lives, who are living by, as Jesus is like, living by the sword. And what is what's God's solution for that? And that just sort of led me to this place where I was so sure that for me, to be a Christian, to be a follower of Jesus, meant to be a peacemaker and to be someone who abhors evil or violence, who abstains from violence and does everything they can to live by the Spirit and not by the sword. And so that started. I didn't find a lot of teachers with that sort of theology in on your average everyday like Christian radio station. I didn't find a lot of that, and so I started really listening to guys like Greg Boyd, um, who's I would say one of the theologians that I trust the most, who I learned from the most. And then
Me too.
Greg introduced me to Bruxy Cavey, and then somehow Brian Zahn got thrown in there.
Yeah.
And so I don't think I self-identified as a neo-Anabaptist until I realized that every time the Meeting Houses podcast would come up, I was so thrilled and so inspired. And Bruxy is pretty, they're pretty vocal. They talk about how they're an Anabaptist community, the Brethren of Christ. And and when I just realized how everything kind of fit into place for me, that the peace teachings of Jesus, and then I understood this concept of shalom, how all of that just kind of clicked in place for me, and then the idea of living a kingdom life that um, became my goal, as I wanted to be a person for the kingdom of God and not necessarily for like America. Um, yes, and that's when I became really comfortable becoming to identifying as a neo Anabaptist. So I would say that shift happened for me maybe like 7 years ago. We were newly in Boston at that point because I was also in a season of life. My kids were, 4, 1, and a baby, so I would be up at midnight hours. I would need adult conversation because I would be stuck with kids all day long, and my husband's off studying or working, and so I just lived on podcasts and the podcasts that really resonated with me the most were from Woodland Hills and then the Meeting House. Um, and and then I became a MennoNerd, and that was like the end of it.
Talk about that. A lot of people won't know what a MennoNerd is.
Yeah, so a MennoNerd is a collective of bloggers and who identify or self-identify as Anabaptist or neo-Anabaptist. So not necessarily Mennonite, but people who follow sort of like the Anabaptist thought. And so we all write around that, and so we're called MennoNerds. So I'm not necessarily Mennonite, but a lot of Mennonite theologians are influences for me.
So your husband, he took a job at a church in LA, like in the
Yeah.
last couple of years, right?
Yeah, we actually just signed, we renewed our lease here in LA. So it'll be a whole year at the end of this month. We moved into this apartment on the 26th. So yeah, we've been in LA for a year.
You've been like in all corners of the country with New Orleans and Boston and LA. You're all over the place.
Yeah, yeah, all over the place.
How do you like life in LA?
I'm adjusting to life in LA. I always saw myself as an East Coast girl. So I knew that I wanted to get out of the South. I mean, I have like strong Texan pride. Like, don't mess with Texas. I seriously love Texas. Um, and I don't know where, I mean, I know where that Texan pride came from. It's like in the barbecue sauce that I,
It's in the water. Yeah.
it's in the water. And so, uh, but I knew that I wanted to live on the East Coast because I don't know why exactly. I just always knew I would end up on the East Coast. I wanted to live there. So when we got to Boston and we were just really thriving in Boston, we were working on our church plant. We were, my husband was going to school. I had this great community. I really thought we would be there forever. But then towards the end of my husband's time in Boston, when he was ending towards the end of his school, he got invited to apply for an associate pastor position here in LA. And he asked me, babe, what do you think of moving to LA? And I said, I don't. I don't think about living in LA because I love Boston so much. So to answer your question, I'm adjusting to life here. I miss I miss public transit like nobody's business. I miss being able to walk out of my house and jump on a train and be someplace in 20 minutes. I miss actual seasons and I miss the community that we cultivated in Boston so much. But I really love our church here. When my husband and I were working on our church plant, one of the key components that we really wanted was a multicultural community that cares about their city. And that's what we wanted to build with our church, which happened to be named New City Boston. And so the church that we are a part of here is called New City Church of LA, which I think is like God's like sense of humor coming to
Yeah.
play. Um, I really love it. We're a few blocks off of Skid Row, so a good percentage of our community are homeless from Skid Row or they're in transitional housing. Um, but then we have loft dwellers and movie producers and fitness gurus who come to our church, and it's just to me it's beautiful every time I go to church to see that our common bond is Jesus. Our church is just starting a mental illness small group, and I just was so excited to see how our church has rallied around that because we know that mental illness is something that most homeless people suffer from. And so just to see how our church is thinking holistically about people and their spiritual formation really excites me. And so I love that. I love going to church on Sunday. I mean, I can't complain about the weather. I know like I feel so bad sometimes when I jump on Facebook and I'm wearing a tank top or something and I know that my friends in Boston are wearing parkas. Like um and so I can't complain about the weather. I think the hardest thing, to be honest, Shane, is that um I'm still helping three little people transition, and all of them are missing Boston in different ways. And so that's the hardest thing about coming to a city like LA that relies on cars. It's so spread out. Um, is helping my kids find their people and their community. And so I'm liking it, but I think a year from now I'll love it. But I like it. It's good enough.
Boston was pretty much all your kids knew, really.
Yeah, that's all they knew. And I mean, I have really good kids in that they've always really understood. We've invited them into any sort of major family um, ministry change. Like when we were thinking about planting our church, we sat with our kids and talked to them about what that means and what that looks like, and how we would be leaving their church that we've gone to all their lives to do this new thing. And so when it looked like uh, my husband would actually get it, when they were down to two candidates, um, that's when we sat down with our kids and we're like, we think we're going to move to LA. And we try to be very careful to not say God is calling us to LA, because I really want to protect their spiritual growth. I don't want them to blame God for any of their frustration right now. But we just said, like, there's this job and we love this community and we think that this is something that we should do. And so um, they were on board in that they prayed for us, they prayed with us, they helped us plan the move. But I mean, you don't know how you're gonna feel until you're actually doing it. And so all they've known is Boston. And so now I'm processing with them resentment and sadness. And yeah, I mean, but I think any family going through any kind of major transition has to process these things too. We just have like the added, I don't know if baggage is the right word, but the added component of God is somehow connected to this, ministry is somehow connected to this. So we have to be super careful with the way we talk about our move.
Why do you think the blogging's something that you've latched onto?
Uh, I I actually never wanted to be a blogger. My husband is a huge, like, he loves blogging. He writes on his blog. He used to write on his blog all the time. And for me, because peacemaking was such an important part of my spiritual journey. Um, I mean, I looked at the online world, it just seemed like so full of strife and conflict, and people were saying hateful things about bloggers that I respected. And I can understand both sides, and I just didn't understand how like these intelligent people on either side couldn't understand somebody else's perspective. And why do they have to like call them out on Twitter? Or like, what is that about? Why can't they privately process this, through email? Why do you have to like just show the worst of yourself in the online world? And so for me, um, I really shied away from blogging for a long time, but I'm a verbal processor, I'm external processor, and I love to write too. And I have big thoughts all the time about. I have big feelings and big thoughts, and I don't mind keeping that. I don't keep them to myself. And so my husband would come home from work hurt. And I would say, "Oh my gosh, can you believe da 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 da?" da?" He would say, "That's a blog post right there." And so for like 6 months, every time I would have one of my tirades or stand on my soapbox, he would say, "That's a blog post. You should start a blog." But I kept saying, I don't want to enter that space. I don't want to just be one more person who uses my words as a weapon. Um, and I don't know how to. I wasn't seeing anybody use their blog as a place of encouragement and um, invitation for diversity, and just really building a blog on a platform of um, unity and peace. So that's when my husband challenged me and said, "Well, maybe you should. One, there's has to be somebody out there doing that. So try to find somebody that's doing that, and then if there isn't anybody, maybe your blog could be that place." And the more I researched it and the more I looked, I realized that, yeah, I could have a blog for that. So my initial blog was like a mommy blog where I kind of sometimes talked about theological things. And then you know how you have a blog and you have like 50 starts and then one actually
Right.
sticks.
Yeah.
And then I had another blog that was sort of our church planting blog, where I felt like free to write about theological things because I wanted people to trust us as spiritual leaders. Um, and then finally, I on my blog, which was once called Carried Away, but on my blog I did 40 days of peace during Lent, the season we're coming up on now, and that's when the idea or the concept of shalom really took root in my heart, and I realized that that is really what I wanted my online space to be about. And so I think having that clarity and, and having sort of a goal to kind of be like the voice of peace in an online space that can be really contentious is why blogging took such an important part of my life. It moved from this fun little hobby that I do to this thing that I really want to cultivate into a life-giving place.
Well, and your blog's meant a lot to a lot of people. Why do you think that is?
I think because um I think because I try very hard to understand both sides of whatever conversation there is. And I try very hard to separate people from their positions. And so when I write about, but I always land on my own convictions. It's not that I say everybody's thoughts is true and it's all right. And we don't have to make a decision. That's not peacemaking. Um, so I think when I write about things like race, I have a very clear story and a very clear perspective around race, and I do feel like the way that I believe is in line with scripture, but I'm able to write about my position in a way that's gracious enough for somebody who doesn't agree with me to at least hear the best of me because I haven't vilified them in my first three sentences. I try very, very hard to not do that because I know that there are good and godly people on either side. And I've been a good and godly person who used to believe that every Christian should own a gun.
Yeah.
And if you come into my home, I'm going to shoot you because it's my job to defend my family. Like I used to be that Christian. I'm a Texan. How could I not?
It's also in the water.
It's in that, yes, it's in the water. But now I don't believe that. And so I'm able to write or talk about it in a way that honors all the people in the conversation. And um, I think that's what excites me the most about the online world now. Is a lot of people are thinking about diversity and unity and honoring the Imago Dei, which is a huge value of mine.
Well, Osheta, it's been so good getting to talk with you. Thanks for being on Seminary Dropout.
Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Remember, you can find all the show notes for this show and all shows at shaneblackshear.com. Oh, and hey, have you ever thought about starting your very own podcast? I bet you have. And I think you should do it. In fact, I've created a course just for you to teach you everything that I've learned over the last couple of years producing Seminary Dropout. So if you're interested in podcasting and want to learn how, go check out my course. You can go there by typing in podcastingforeveryone.org. And you can get a special discount by typing in the discount code Seminary Dropout, all one word. That'll give you 25% off. So go check it out. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay. Thanks to those that left ratings and reviews on iTunes this week. Remember, that keeps the show front and center. Also, remember, you can find me on Twitter at beardonabike. That's at beardonabike. Also, I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/ShaneBlackshear123. And remember that Seminary Dropout is listener supported. You can visit supportseminarydropout.com and press Become a Patron. Remember, this music you're listening to right now is by D.L. Rossi. You can find him online on iTunes and at dlrossi.com. All right, thanks again for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Love you. Take care.
But